Today we're taking a look at something really special from the land of Lego, Hans Christian Andersen, and of course, absurdly complicated and confusing furniture assembly instructions. This is the Danish-designed Buchardt A10. All new tweeter, new purify woofer, no MDF, all solid wood cabinets, sealed design, differing from the passive radiator on the P300 and S400 Mark II, and powered. 150 watt amplifier for each woofer, as well as a 50 for each tweeter. Same Buchardt design aesthetic as far as looks, but certainly a number of features unique to this model that really make the 10-year anniversary speaker stand out. I'm really excited to review this one. When Mads from Buchardt reached out saying he had some A10s available for review, seeing if I was interested in getting a pair, I obviously was. In my past reviews, the speakers I had in from Buchardt presented in a way that was really fantastic for my ear, each having a bit of a different flavor, but always staying true to that Buchardt house-type sound. I really wanted to hear how this active speaker would respond when they had complete control over the driver and the amplification pairings. But the proof is in the pudding, or I guess the proof is in whatever artery clogging delicacy the Danes eat in this case. Pastries. My preference is generally passive speakers, not because I think passive sounds better. I mean, I can't really say that having these A10s in-house that sound as good or better than any bookshelf speakers I've had in. I think it's the gear and just that search for synergy, that magical word that I'm not even sure if it carries any meaning after our corporate overlords got a hold of it. Which corporate buzzword is the worst? Is it synergy, low-hanging fruit, or circle back? I'm sure a number of you out there can't escape a meeting without hearing some of these too. Let me know which one of these makes you cringe every time you hear it. Why don't we just circle back on that in the comments section? And just because you're searching for this synergy doesn't mean you ever really find it. But at least it does give me something to toy around with. Say you want to change something out, bring in a different component, amps, DACs, speakers, all kinds of separates. You can really mix and match to your particular sound. At the same time, you can't really deny it. Active certainly has its selling points when you think about it logically. You don't have to worry about matching gear. The A10's already matched and tuned specifically for the drivers and the hardware. No cables, no concerns about added distortion, simply better control. Everything works how the manufacturer intended it, barring some rooms and some complexities, of course. In some ways, it just makes sense to go with something like this. It's almost like a cheat code for good sound. Random thought, but does anyone recall any cheat codes from old video game consoles still burned into their brain from 20 plus years ago? I still have ABA, CABB in my head from like 25 years ago, alarmingly. So what do you get when you purchase a pair of A10s? For one, you get a cabinet for the buyer who appreciates woodworking. These are actually solid wood, not the typical MDF you see on most speakers. There's certainly good veneers out there, but the look and feel, and maybe just the knowledge that this is actually solid wood, lights a bit of a spark in me. I myself dabble in woodworking, so it's one of those things a person can really appreciate. Something of note concerning the wood, it's all FSC certified, ensuring there'll be little impact on the environment. For each tree removed, another's planted. I know that some will question the use of hardwoods here, mainly with the concerns of the cabinet possibly being more active or providing a sound rather than the proven and effective MDF. But that's covered here as well. They use a thicker cabinet than what they use on their MDF speakers, as well as brace them a little bit differently for this series. Lastly, the final step in deadening the cabinet is using a product called Basotect. I think that's how they say it. Basically a more effective polyfill. Big change here, you get a new tweeter on this one. The RFA19 tweeter. Aluminum dome tweeter on this one versus the soft dome that is used on what I believe the rest of their lineup. And straight away, in some ways I was taken back, or maybe just surprised by the sound in comparison to previous models. More resolution and detail for sure on these. I would say more of a refined type sound. You can always appreciate this nice aluminum waveguide too. It was actually machined by Odin's blacksmiths. Well, that or a CNC machine. The woofer is where things get really interesting too. We get a 6.5-inch Purify driver that is custom made for the A10s. These are incredible drivers. A bit of a different look with the surround. I actually heard the surrounds are made of a secret Scandinavian polymer unicorn composite. Okay, I lied again. I just can't stop myself. But the look is sort of crinkled in a way, but it's for a good reason. These drivers are highly effective at minimizing distortion. Likely the best you can get today. So while some may not appreciate the look, I actually like it, but that's likely just the tech geek in me appreciating the design. Lots of times people end up a bit disappointed when they find out that the speaker that they spent all this money on had cheap parts. Not the case here. Hardwood enclosure, CNC'd aluminum, and this Purify driver, which isn't the exact model but likely very close, that retails for $439 each. So we're coming up on nearly $1,000 just for the two included woofers on these. And I can tell you a lot of the magic is coming from the woofer on these. Maybe they don't contain unicorn composite, but they can really take abuse without ever seeming to give up their composure. If you're in a situation like myself, you enjoy a louder listen, all the dynamics and feels, right? But sometimes you just can't get away with cranking it up. Maybe it's a shared space, or you're playing it so loud that your wife couldn't hear which house they picked on House Hunters. Either way, when you have the volume down low, there just isn't enough grunt in the bass or the highs. Just doesn't carry that same sparkle. So the highs and lows are still actually there, but us as humans just can't hear them as well consistently across the frequency ranges. Maybe you golden ear claiming magicians think you can, but that's an entirely different topic. This theory has actually been around since the 1930s, and it's called the Fletcher-Munson effect if you want to read further into the science. The simple knob on the 70s receivers have a similar outcome, but not to the same level of compensation as an automatic adjustment like the A10 has. So with this enabled at 70 dB or less, you can expect a much more lively sound if you want something on in the background while still being able to hold a conversation with those around you. This is something to consider if you're going to be using this near field in your office or similar situations. I thought it performed really well while I was using it at my desk. Sure, there's times when I like to, bring the volume up high, but a good deal of times I'm just listening at lower levels while working, and this really gives you a good enjoyment for that background music feel. When you open up the box on these, you notice a USB drive, and basically you can think of it as a key to 8 other speakers. It's actually used for loading their master tunings onto the speakers. If you check out the Buchardt site, they have 9 tuning options available. It comes loaded with the stock flat tuning, but you can find all kinds of things to tailor the sound to your tastes. With all the tuning flexibility, the A10s are kind of like those Transformer toys, but instead of turning into a truck, they turn into whatever speaker your space needs them to be. Adults need toys too, right? Maybe you want to pair these with a sub, throw on the high-pass 60 Hz filter, reduce the THD and let the subs handle the dirty work. Or maybe you're more of a warm presentation type of person. There's a tune specifically made for that, brings down the treble, and makes these bad recordings safe. The one I felt like I enjoyed the most and switched between for near field as well as my main listening room was the tuning called Near Field Studio Intense. It brought out a great deal of scale and precision to the sound. Now, depending on what I was listening to, I did find some presentations a bit much, and went back to the stock flat tuning. But that was highly dependent on the artist that I was listening to, I would say. These can be a lot of fun to switch between, not only for different deliveries, but also just fine tuning for your space. They even have a wall filter if your placement requires the speakers to be close to a boundary. Just play around with these, see what fits your space. You might find 2 or 3 that you switch between depending on your circumstances. Buchardt products have some of the simplest room correction that I've ran into, but before I go further into it, just be aware you do need to use the Platinum Hub to utilize this feature. You get a test tone and you simply cover as much of the room as possible in 60 seconds while staying a particular distance from the speakers. And you have 2 options for measurements, an iPhone or the newly released Zen mic, which measures more accurately than the phones. The room modes you're looking to eliminate or at least lessen are caused by the boundaries within your space. Sound pressure is reflected, causing what we call room modes. The easiest way to describe this phenomenon is when you have a sub. Have you ever noticed you could be sitting in one seat and feel like you're not getting any of the impact? But then you move over a few feet, or in some cases a few inches, and the slam and the bass is back. Maybe even too much in some cases. This is where the calculation is going to take place. It may require a particular frequency or several to be raised or lowered. One thing to always keep in mind here is that it takes a lot of amp power to boost a frequency. So instead of looking at a chart and thinking you always need to boost, maybe you would actually be better served dropping peaks and finding neutral that way. Oftentimes room treatments won't get you all the way there, and you can't guarantee that this will either, depending on your space. But it certainly works to your benefit and should get you a lot closer. When all the calculations are done, you'll be shown what your current room's frequency response is. Then it'll take over from there and you can apply the bass filter. You can switch back and forth between the corrected and the uncorrected. I think most will appreciate the correction, but who knows, maybe you've come to enjoy a peak or two. Just try it out, see how it works. On the topic of the Platinum Hub that I mentioned, it is required for the Buchardt room correction. It's this small little black box. It houses your inputs and offers your streaming options. The only output is the WiSA wireless, so it's the most cost-effective way to use these speakers wirelessly. But by no means is that a required method. Both speakers have an XLR input on them as well for a direct connection. The Platinum Hub is going to be the home of many features, including the manual EQ, as well as the room correction. It's also the easiest way to expand your system with a compatible WiSA sub, like the new Buchardt sub that just came out. Within the app, you can apply high-pass filters on the speakers and low-pass on the sub, adjust distances, and a few other volume-related tools. My preference when using the hub was to have a streamer connected to it like the DMP A6, but it's also fully capable of AirPlay 2, Chromecast, it's room ready, Spotify Connect, DLNA, and Bluetooth. So a pretty wide area of coverage. If you do go the route of the DMP A6, you can still accomplish room correction with these using their parametric EQ, along with a mic and Roo software. It just won't be as simple and fast as waving a mic around your room and having all the adjustments completed for you. Getting into the sound review with these, one of the first things you're going to notice is you can play these really loud and they just never seem to really give up. Likely because the tuning allowed within the amps. An advantage of integrating the amps like this, really, they have complete control over how they behave with the drivers. You often hear about people talking about pairings and synergy between equipment. Some gear just matches up a bit better than others. What you hear with these is essentially exactly what they wanted you to hear. Well, depending on the master tuning that you have selected. When you bring these into your space, the other thing you're likely going to notice right away is the bass. I don't feel like it's the most important part of a speaker design by any means, mainly because I generally bring subs into my setup. And it's really tough to compete with a well-integrated sub or two, but these do something in some ways that don't really make sense. They reach down to small sub levels of bass, but at the same time present it in a way that most subs can't. This Purify woofer has everything coming through with such a tight and defined punch. Everything is controlled without really ever being fluttered. And what I mean by that is oftentimes small driver speakers really start to get a bit sloppy on loud bass-heavy tracks. The notes almost start to blend together, and it just starts to become deep, vibrating noise rather than detailed and adding to the actual music presentation. Really no mid-bass muddiness on these. I don't think at any point you'll listen to the A10s and think, I really need to bring a sub into this, or feel like you're missing much as far as extension. These are easily a sub-optional speaker, and maybe even leaning to the side of no sub recommended, because I worry about changing one of my favorite properties of the speaker. And just as a side note, I did integrate a couple of subs in later, and just as I expected, you certainly get more, but it wasn't really more in the sense of scale. It was just more so an increase in the tactile feel from the bass that's tough to replicate without a sub. The mid-range also benefits from this precision the Purify woofers deliver. Plenty of clarity and texture coming through this region. I feel like these drivers were able to deliver across such a large frequency range without ever really stepping on the toes of the different frequencies. The deep bass never felt like it was bleeding over, muddying things up. Everything was really refined in this regard. The sound with these is very much a large speaker sound. Expect fullness, weight, and minimal effort to the music. Also expect a treble that in some ways is more open than previous Buchardt designs. I felt like this new tweeter broke away from some of the in-house Buchardt sound. What you get here is more forward, I would say sophisticated and insightful treble that's at some points razor sharp, but never into that overly analytical and annoying territory. It's really not too much high frequency presence by any means, and it's just likely exactly what a number of people were looking for when shopping for the S400 Mark II, and finding it not quite as detailed or refined in the highs as they desired. This new tweeter carries more detail and resolution, but doesn't fall into that trap of being aggressive with things like female vocals and cymbal hits. I personally really enjoyed the characteristics of the S400 Mark II, but this certainly puts a spin on it that's really agreeable. Mind you, it does carry a little more precision and detail, so poorly recorded songs will definitely show their flaws more openly, but it's a small price to pay and honestly not much of a concern for myself. I have several tracks I enjoy that they're poorly recorded, but it honestly never stops me from enjoying them. Worst case scenario, these have the master tunings available, so you could easily throw on that warm tune and get that forgiving, smooth sound that you might desire. Purchasing these is quite simple. It's a flat rate. Shipping, tax, import fees are included. They offer a 45-day return policy if you're not satisfied, as well as a 5-year warranty on the speakers and 2 on the amps, expanded to 10 years and 4 years with registration. So yeah, if you're in the market for a premium compact speaker setup that authentically replicates the sort of thunderous battlefield clashes that inspired Danish Viking death metal, or maybe, just normal music genres, the Buchardt A10s need to be thoroughly auditioned. Just be sure to pick up some Danish Carlsberg Pilsner while you give them a listen. Well, if it's past noon when you're watching. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? If you could, please give a like and subscribe, comment down below. It really does help videos reach a larger audience. I really appreciate the support in growing this community together. Lots more on the way. Let's chat soon. Later.